Jake's boots thumped heavily on the wooden porch of the two-story house on Maple Street, a quiet Portland suburb where the streetlights flickered dimly and the neighborhood dogs barked at the occasional car. It was just after midnight, and the November chill nipped at his knuckles as he pounded on the door. His breath came out in short, angry puffs, visible in the frosty air. "Catherine, open the damn door," he shouted, his voice hoarse and echoing down the empty street. He didn't care if the neighbors heard. Not today. Inside, the hall light came on, a yellow blur shining through the frosted glass next to the door. Jake took a step back, clenching his fists. His dark jacket was wrinkled from the long drive here. He hadn't planned this, not really. He'd just gotten into his old Ford, driven across town, and here he was, standing on the threshold of the house they'd once shared. It was her territory now, but that hadn't stopped him. The door creaked open. Catherine stood in the doorway, wearing a gray robe, her hair pulled back into a loose bun. Her face, pale in the lamplight, looked tired, but her eyes were alert. She crossed her eyes, concerned but not surprised. "Jake, what are you doing?" Her voice was even, but there was a note of alarm in it. She hadn't been expecting him. Not at midnight. "Open the door all the way, Catherine," he said, stepping closer. His voice shook with anger. "We'll talk. Right now." She paused, holding the door open as if deciding whether to let him in. Then she sighed and opened the door wider. "Come on in. But if you're going to scream, I'm calling the cops." Jake walked past her into the hallway, his boots leaving dirty marks on the light wood floor. The house smelled of coffee and her perfume, the same one she had worn when they were married. The familiar scent hit his nostrils, and for a second he froze, then shook off the memories. That was not why he was here. The hallway was cozy, with photographs on the walls, a soft carpet, a basket of keys and mail on the table. But there was something cold in the air, as if the house was no longer alive. Catherine closed the door and turned to him, crossing her arms. "So what happened? You barge in here in the middle of the night, screaming like a lunatic. What do you want, Jake?" He turned to face her, eyes blazing. "You know what I need. Don't pretend. You think I'm just going to swallow this, after everything you've done?" Her eyebrows rose, but she didn't look away. "What are you talking about? If you have problems, don't blame them on me. We got divorced, in case you forgot, 6 months ago." "Don't play with me, Catherine." He took a step closer, and she involuntarily retreated to the wall. "You told everyone that I was the one who dumped you, that I cheated on you while you were depressed. Lisa told me everything at that damn party. My friends, my coworkers, everyone thinks I'm a jerk. You ruined my life." Catherine pressed her lips together, her fingers tightening on the edges of her robe. "Lisa, are you listening to Lisa? She was drunk and talking nonsense, Jake. I didn't say anything like that." "Don't lie to me," he raised his voice, and it echoed through the house. "I'm not an idiot. People turn their backs when I walk into a room. My boss asked if I was okay because he'd heard rumors. Rumors, Catherine, and it all started after you." She shook her head, her face tense. "You're paranoid. I'm not running around town trashing you. I have my own life, my own job. Why would I want to do this?" "Why?" He almost laughed, but it was bitter. "To cover your ass, so that everyone would pity you, the poor thing who was betrayed by her husband. You always knew how to get out of this, Catherine. But I know the truth. I know what you did." Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time, fear flickered in them. "What are you talking about, Jake? Stop beating around the bush. Get straight to the point." He paused, looking at her. The memories came flooding back. He swallowed the lump in his throat. "You know." Catherine froze, her face growing even paler. She opened her mouth, but then closed it as if the words were stuck. "Jake, this isn't, you don't understand." "I don't get it." He took a step toward her, and she pressed herself against the wall. "I get it. You cheated on me. For months, and when I filed for divorce, you decided to make me the scapegoat. And now I'm going to pay for that too, right? But you know what? Now it's your turn." "Jake, stop." Her voice wavered, and she raised her hand defensively. "You're out of your mind. Let's talk, but not like this. Don't yell. Let's sit down. I'll pour you some coffee and—" "Coffee?" He stared at her, disbelieving. "Are you serious? You think I came for coffee? I came to let you know that I won't let you ruin my life anymore. I have proof, Catherine, and I'm sending it to everyone. Your boss, your friends, your sister. Let's see how you look when the truth comes out." Her eyes widened, and she grabbed his sleeve. "Jake, no. You won't do this. It will destroy me. My career, Please, don't." He shook her hand off. "You weren't thinking about me when you lied to everyone. When you slept with him. Why should I think about you?" Catherine swallowed, her fingers shaking. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I was in a bad place, Jake. After we found out I couldn't cope. Don't you dare," he pointed a finger at her. "Don't you dare put this on me. I did everything to support you. Doctors, therapy, I offered adoption, and you just ran away to him." She turned away, her shoulders slumping. "You don't understand. It wasn't just. I didn't mean to hurt you. But you did, and you keep doing it." His voice was quieter, but there was more pain in it than anger. "You destroyed us, and now you're trying to destroy me, but I won't let that happen." Catherine looked at him, tears in her eyes. "Jake, I didn't lie about you. Lisa could have messed up, or someone else. I can't control what people say. But if you do this, if you send those pictures, you'll destroy me. Is it worth it?" He clenched his jaw, looking at her. Part of him wanted to walk away, to leave it at that. They had been married for 5 years. He loved her, really loved her. But then he remembered his friends looking away, his colleague whispering to another, Lisa spitting in his face. "You broke her heart." And the rage returned. "You chose this, Catherine," he said, retreating toward the door. "You started this game. Now I'll finish it." "Jake, wait!" She stepped after him, but he had already opened the door. Cold air rushed into the hallway. "We can work this out. Don't do this, please." He stopped at the threshold without turning around. "You knew what would happen when you started to lie. It's too late to ask for mercy." The door slammed behind him, and he strode toward his Ford, parked at the curb. His heart was pounding, his hands were shaking, but he felt strangely relieved. He had said what he wanted. Now all he had to do was do it. The envelope of evidence was in the glove compartment, and he knew who to send it to. Catherine thought she could rewrite their story, but he was going to tell the truth. Behind him, the light in the hallway went out, but he didn't look back. The car started on the first try, and he drove off into the night, leaving the house and their past behind him. Portland, June 2015, smelled of coffee and pine. It was a Friday night in the city center, where the bars on Northwest 23rd Street were filling up with people eager to start the weekend. Jake, a 25-year-old architect who had just finished an internship at a small firm, stood at the bar of the Driftwood, clutching a bottle of local IPA. His jeans were slightly frayed, and his plaid shirt was rolled up to his elbows, the usual style for a guy who spent his days drawing and his evenings hanging out with friends. He had come to the party at the invitation of his buddy Tom, who had promised a bunch of new faces and cheap beer. The bar was cramped, wooden tables piled high with empty glasses, neon signs flashing above the bar, and the hum of voices drowned out by old rock playing on the speakers. Jake scanned the crowd, spotting familiar faces, Tom chatting with some guys at a pool table, and a couple of girls from their college giggling over cocktails. He was about to walk over to Tom when he spotted her. She was standing at the far end of the bar, laughing at something the bartender had said. Catherine, 24, a journalist who had just started at the local paper, was wearing a navy blue short-sleeved dress and sneakers. Her brown hair was down, slightly tousled, and she was holding a glass of wine. Jake didn't know who she was, but something about her laugh loud, genuine, made him stare. "Hey, are you just going to stare or come over?" Tom clapped him on the shoulder, smirking. He was already slightly tipsy, his shirt smelling of beer. "Who is this?" Jake nodded towards the girl, trying not to look too interested. Catherine. Melissa's cousin works at the newspaper. Want to introduce her? Tom winked, but Jake waved him off. I'll handle it myself, he said, finishing his beer for courage. He pushed through the crowd, feeling his heartbeat a little faster. He reached the bar and found himself next to her as she was ordering more wine. Do you always laugh that loud, or is it just when the bartender is joking? Jake turned to her, leaning against the counter. He immediately regretted his phrase. It sounded stupid, but it was too late to back out. Catherine looked at him, her eyebrows raised, but the corners of her lips twitching into a smile. Only when the jokes are actually funny. Do you always hit on him like this, or is this your first time? He chuckled, feeling the tension ease. Honestly, first, I usually just stand there with a beer and wait for someone to talk. Well, you're lucky I'm here. She took her glass from the bartender and turned to him. Catherine. Jake, he said, holding out his hand, and she shook it, her palm warm and slightly damp from the condensation on her glass. So you're with Melissa. Tom said you were her sister. My cousin. She dragged me here and said it would be fun. Not sure if she was telling the truth or not yet. Catherine glanced around the bar, her eyes glittering in the neon light. Whose friend are you? Tom's? Yeah, we went to school together. He was more of a party boy than a student, though. Jake nodded toward Tom, who was now trying to hit the ball into a pocket and cursing loudly when he missed. Catherine laughed, and Jake felt his cheeks warm. Her laughter was infectious, and he wanted to hear it again. So what do you do, Catherine? Besides, save the parties with your presence. Oh, I'm a journalist. Just started at the Portland Tribune. I cover local news, nothing serious yet. But I want to do big stories, exposure, corruption, stuff like that. She shrugged, but there was real passion in her voice. What about you? An architect. Well, almost. I'm interning at a firm that builds houses. I want to design eco-friendly buildings with solar panels, recycled materials, so that people live in harmony with nature, not destroy it. He paused, suddenly feeling too serious. Sounds like a cliché, right? No, that sounds cool. Catherine leaned in a little closer, her eyes lighting up. My dad spent his whole life building office boxes. If he thought like you, maybe the world would be a better place. Jake smiled, surprised by her enthusiasm. They began talking over the music. She told him about growing up in the Seattle suburbs, dreaming of being a reporter ever since she watched Spotlight, and how she hated morning deadlines. He told him how his grandfather had been a carpenter, which had inspired him to become an architect, and how he still feared that his designs would be taken seriously. They joked and teased each other, and the beer and wine flowed. Are you always this talkative, or did the beer loosen your tongue? Catherine nudged him as they walked out of the bar and onto the street. The party had been going on for a while, and they decided to take a walk while Tom and Melissa argued over where to spend the night. The street was noisy, cars honking, groups of people laughing, the smell of fast food mingling with the dampness of a recent rain. Only with people who keep me entertained. Jake shoved his hands into his jeans pockets as he walked alongside her. And you, are you always so? Alive? Alive? She snorted, but smiled. Mom says I'm too loud for my own good. But life is short. You have to make the most of it. Got it, he said, looking at her, noticing the way the light from the flashlight fell on her face. She wasn't just pretty, she had an energy that drew him to her. So what do you do when you're not writing articles or hanging out at bars? Oh, I'm a master of adventure, Catherine said, stopping at a coffee shop window where a concert poster hung. I like going out of town to the ocean, or just walking in the woods. And you? Don't tell me you sit at home and draw plans. Sometimes I paint, he shrugged, but grinned. But I'm all about nature, too. I was in Mount Hood a couple of weeks ago. The views there make you want to drop everything and live in a cabin. A cabin isn't my thing, she shook her head. I need Wi-Fi and a coffee machine. But the views, yeah, that's my thing. We should go sometime. See if you can handle my pace. Is that a dare? Jake narrowed his eyes, feeling warmth spread in his chest. She was flirting, and he liked it. Perhaps, Catherine looked at him, her smile both daring and gentle. But you'll have to try, architect. They reached an intersection where Tom and Melissa caught up with them. Hey, where are you guys going? Melissa hugged Catherine, her voice slightly drunk. We're going to another bar. Let's go. Catherine looked at Jake as if asking his opinion. He shrugged. I'm in if you're in. Okay, but only if you're the one treating, she winked, and they laughed. Before returning to the crowd, Jake pulled out his phone. Give me your number, in case I want to do that hike to Mount Hood. Catherine rolled her eyes, but dictated the number as he typed. Just don't call me at 7 in the morning. I'm not one for early risers. Deal, he said, keeping in touch, feeling something click inside him. This wasn't just an introduction. This was the start of something. They went back to their friends, but for the rest of the night Jake found himself looking for her. Catherine danced with Melissa, laughing at Tom's jokes, but a few times their eyes met, and each time she smiled just for him. When they said goodbye at the bar, she waved at him, calling out, Don't forget about hike, Jake. He watched her leave with Melissa and knew he would call her tomorrow. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. The Portland night was buzzing around him, but for Jake it was just a little brighter. The summer of 2016 in Portland was warm, with the scent of blooming magnolias and freshly cut grass. Jake and Catherine, a year after they met, were inseparable. Their romance was in full swing, spending weekends exploring the area and evenings arguing about politics or movies over pizza. In early August, they decided to escape the city to the Oregon coast, to Cannon Beach, to spend a few days by the ocean. Jake had already landed a full-time job at an architecture firm, and Catherine was writing for the Portland Tribune, dreaming of a big career. Their lives were full of plans, and they couldn't get enough of each other. Jake drove his old Ford down Highway 26, the windows down and the warm wind blowing through Catherine's hair. She sat in the passenger seat, wearing shorts and a white t-shirt, her bare feet on the dashboard. The radio was playing Top 40, and she was singing along, off-key but enthusiastic. Do you know exactly where we're going? Catherine turned to him, squinting. Her sunglasses had slipped down her nose. Because last time you promised a shortcut, and we were stuck in traffic for an hour. Jake grinned, keeping his eyes on the road. Relax, I'm a genius navigator. Cannon Beach is an hour away. We'll be there by sunset, have a bonfire, and roast marshmallows. Everything is on track. Marshmallow? Really? She laughed, nudging his shoulder. You're so old-fashioned. Guitar and campfire songs next? Hey, don't touch the classics. He pretended to be offended. A campfire, marshmallows, the ocean, that's romance. You said to yourself that you wanted adventure. I said adventure, not 80s picnic. Catherine rolled her eyes, but her smile showed she was pleased. Okay, I'm all for the marshmallows. But if you start singing, I'm going to sleep in the car. Deal, Jake said, holding out his hand, and she slapped it like a high five. They both laughed, and he felt a warmth spread through his chest. She was easy, easier than anyone had ever been. Cannon Beach greeted them with crashing waves and salty air. They parked at a small campsite just off the beach where tents and campervans were already pitched. Jake hauled out their packs and a bag of food while Catherine lugged sleeping bags, grumbling that he was making her carry the heaviest stuff. They pitched the tent, or rather, Jake pitched it while Catherine sat on a log and gave advice. Are you sure you got that peg in right? She pointed to the corner of the tent, sipping from a bottle of water. It looks like it's about to fly away. Cat, I build houses. I think I can handle a tent. Jake hammered a peg into the ground, wiping sweat from his forehead. His shirt was stuck to his back, and he looked slightly annoyed, but her teasing only amused him. Oh, excuse me, Mr. Architect. She stood up, bowing dramatically. I'll go collect some firewood while you create your masterpiece. By evening, they had built a fire on the beach, away from the other tourists. The sky had turned orange and the waves were crashing against Haystack Rock, which towered nearby. Jake strung marshmallows on branches and Catherine sat wrapped in his old sweatshirt against the chill of the evening. "So, how do you like my romance?" Jake handed her a toasted marshmallow, slightly charred. He sat next to her, throwing sticks on the fire. 4 out of 5. Catherine took a bite, wincing at the sweetness. -1 for almost burning my marshmallow. Ungrateful, he nudged her with his shoulder, and she laughed, almost dropping the branch. "I tried, by the way." Okay, 5 out of 5. She leaned against him, looking into the fire. "This is really cool. I haven't been to the ocean in ages. Thanks for getting me out." "You're welcome," Jake said, putting his arm around her shoulders and feeling her relax. They were silent, listening to the crackling of the fire and the sound of the waves. He thought he could live like this forever, with her by the fire, without a care in the world. Catherine suddenly turned to him, her face serious. "Do you ever think about the future? Like, what's going to happen in 5, 10 years? He looked surprised, but nodded. "Sometimes. I want my own company to design houses that people will love. Maybe build a house for myself somewhere outside the city. What about you?" "I want to write articles that change things," she said, staring into the fire, her voice full of determination. "Reveal the truth, help people, and, I don't know, have a family, I guess. A house, a dog, kids to run around in the yard." Jake smiled, imagining it. "Sounds like a plan. Only the dog has to be big. None of those little ones that yap all the time." "Hey, don't touch the chihuahua." Catherine poked him in the side, and they laughed again. But then she added more quietly, "I'm serious, Jake. I want us to have something real. Together." He looked at her, feeling his heart beat faster. "Me too, Cat. I can't imagine this without you." She smiled, and they kissed, sitting by the fire. At that moment, the future seemed simple and clear. A few months later, in April 2017, Jake and Catherine stood in a garden outside of town, an hour outside Portland. It was their wedding, small but warm, with 50 guests, a white tent, and tables set outside. Catherine wore a simple white dress with lace sleeves, a wreath of wildflowers in her hair. Jake, in a gray suit, was nervous until he saw her walking toward him, arm in arm with her father. The ceremony was quick. They exchanged vows they had written themselves. Catherine promised to always be his most honest critic, and Jake promised to make her coffee every morning, even if she grumbles. Guests laughed, and their parents wiped away tears. At the reception, under a garland of light bulbs, Jake and Catherine danced their first dance to an Ed Sheeran song that Catherine chose because it wasn't too sappy. Tom, their mutual friend, raised a toast, half drunk but sincere. To Jake, who finally found someone who tolerates his blueprints, and to Catherine, who makes us all feel lazy. Everyone clapped, and Catherine stuck her tongue out at Tom. Later, as the guests ate cake and danced, Catherine pulled Jake toward the table where her parents were sitting. Her mother, Ellen, in a green dress, hugged him. "Welcome to the family, Jake. Just remember, she likes to have the last word." "I already noticed," Jake chuckled, looking at Catherine, who rolled her eyes. "Mom, don't scare him." Catherine took his hand. "He barely agreed to the wedding anyway." "That's not true," Jake squeezed her hand. "I agreed from the first second." Her father, Bill, shook his hand. "Take care of her, son. She's stubborn, but she's got a heart of gold." "I know." Jake looked at Catherine, and she smiled, blushing slightly. Later, they fled from the guests to the edge of the garden where the apple trees grew. Catherine took off her shoes because they were too tight and stood barefoot on the grass. "Well, Mr. Wilson, how do you like being married?" "So far, so good, Mrs. Wilson," he said, putting his arm around her waist. "But I demand a reconsideration of contract if you start stealing my shirts." "It's part of the deal," she said, leaning against him, and they stood looking at the stars. "I'm happy, Jake. I really am." "Me too," he kissed her, and in that moment nothing else existed. It had been drizzling for a week, leaving puddles on the sidewalks and the smell of wet asphalt in the air. Catherine sat in the doctor's office at a medical center in the southeast of the city, clutching the strap of her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. Her jeans were slightly damp from the rain, and her hair, pulled back into a ponytail, was stuck to her neck. Jake waited in the hallway, leafing through an old magazine he'd found on the table. His dark green jacket was draped over the back of a chair, and his boots had left muddy marks on the linoleum. They'd come here after months of tests, hoping the doctor would finally explain why Catherine couldn't get pregnant. The office was cramped. White walls, a poster about healthy eating, a metal desk covered with papers. Dr. Linda Harris, a woman in her 50s in a blue coat, sat across from Catherine, holding a clipboard with the results. Her voice was calm, but Catherine detected caution in it. "Catherine, I've reviewed all of your tests," the doctor began, adjusting her glasses. "Unfortunately, we have confirmation of your diagnosis, and this is most likely the cause of your problems conceiving. In addition, there are some hormonal imbalances that complicate the situation." Catherine blinked, feeling her throat tighten. "So, I can't get pregnant? Ever?" Dr. Harris sighed, setting her clipboard down on the table. "I don't want to say never. There are things we can try medication, but I have to be honest. Your chances are very low. We can continue testing, see fertility specialists, but you need to be prepared for the fact that natural pregnancy is unlikely." Catherine stared at her hands, unsure of what to say. She had imagined this moment 100 times, but the reality hit harder. What if we tried EVF? Would it work?" Her voice shook, almost whispering. "If is an option," the doctor nodded. "But success is not guaranteed, and the process can be long and difficult, both physically and emotionally. I recommend that you and your husband discuss all options. There are also adoption and surrogacy. You don't have to decide right now." Catherine swallowed, her eyes filling with tears. She wanted to ask something else, but the words were stuck. "Thank you," she managed, standing up. I need to think." Of course, the doctor stood up, handing her a folder of papers. "This is information about specialists and clinics. Call if you have any questions. And Catherine, don't blame yourself. It's not your fault." Catherine nodded, but the doctor's words went unheard. She walked out into the hallway, where Jake immediately jumped up from his chair, throwing down his magazine. His face was tense. He noticed her red eyes. "Cat, what did they say? Is everything okay?" She shook her head, clutching the folder. "Let's go. I don't want to talk here." They walked out of the building in silence, into the light rain. Jake opened his umbrella, but Catherine ignored the water running down her face. In the car, parked at the curb, she finally burst into tears, covering her face with her hands. Jake, sitting behind the wheel, froze, unsure how to react. "Cat, tell me," he turned to her, his voice soft but worried. "What did she say? Is it something serious?" "I can't have kids," Catherine blurted out, her voice breaking. "I have poly, something wrong with my ovaries. She said the chances are slim. If, maybe, but it won't work, Jake. I know it won't work." He looked at her, trying to process it. "Wait," she said, almost no. "Does that mean there's a chance? We can try, right? Did she give us any options?" Catherine shook her head, wiping away tears with her sleeve. "You don't understand. It's not just trying. It's months, years, injections, hospitals. And it still won't work. I can't have a baby, Jake." "Don't say that." He took her hand, but she pulled it away. "Cat, we'll figure this out. There are doctors, clinics. We'll find the best ones." And she mentioned adoption, right? "We can." "I don't want to adopt," she screamed, her voice echoing in the cramped car. "I wanted my baby. Ours. You know, I dreamed of this, and now nothing." Jake paused, feeling her words cut him. He wanted to hug her, but she turned away to the window, looking out at the rain. "Cat, I'm just trying to help. We can do this. Together." "You can't fix this," she said quietly but sharply. No one can. They drove home in silence, the sound of the windshield wipers the only sound. Their house on Maple Street, a two-story house with blue shutters, looked the same as ever, but inside, something was different. Catherine dropped her bag on the living room couch and went into the bathroom, closing the door. Jake stood in the kitchen, staring at the half-drunk coffee in the mug she had left that morning. He felt helpless, and it was killing him. An hour later, Catherine emerged, wearing an old t-shirt and sweatpants. Her eyes were red, but she was no longer crying. Jake was sitting at the kitchen table, holding his phone, where he was researching Cat, I found a couple clinics in Portland, he began, trying to sound optimistic. There's one with good reviews. We could schedule a consultation. I don't want to. She leaned against the door frame, crossing her arms. Not now. I need time. Okay, sure, he nodded, putting his phone down. But can we at least talk? I don't know what to do, Kat. I want to be close, but you're pushing me away. I'm not pushing away, she said, her voice tired. I just can't talk about it. Not today. Please, Jake. Okay, he stood up, walked toward her, but stopped, hesitant to hug her. I just want you to know, I'm here for you. Whatever happens, we'll get through this. She looked at him, her lips trembling, but she did not answer. I'm going to bed, she said, and went upstairs, leaving him alone. Jake sank down onto the couch, looking out over their living room, the wedding photos on the shelf, the blanket Catherine always draped over her legs, the stack of her work notebooks on the coffee table. The house was theirs, but for the first time, it felt like a stranger. He thought about how they dreamed of children, of a room for the baby, of walks in the park. It seemed far away now, and he didn't know how to bring back Catherine who'd laughed around the fire. Catherine lay in her bedroom, curled up under the covers. She was awake, staring at the ceiling. The doctor's words kept swirling around in her head, and each time they hit her harder. She imagined telling her mother, her sister, and the thought made it worse. She wanted to scream, but instead she clutched the pillow, feeling the tears start flowing again. Jake was down there, and she knew he was trying, but his words only reminded her of what she had lost. She didn't want to blame him, but she couldn't stop feeling angry at herself, at her body, at her life. The Portland Tribune's Southwest office was the center of Catherine's life. She was 29, and she spent 12 hours or more in the office, immersed in stories about corruption in local construction companies. Her stories were making waves. She had recently won an award from the Oregon Journalists Association, and her colleagues joked that she would soon move to New York. Her desk was littered with notebooks, pens, and empty coffee cups, and her laptop hummed with open tabs. Catherine got home late, sometimes past midnight, and their home on Maple Street, once full of laughter and warmth, had become quiet, almost alien. Jake felt the emptiness most of all. He worked for an architectural firm, drafting plans for apartment complexes, and spent his days in front of his laptop in the living room. His jeans had been replaced by sweatpants, and his shoes sat by the door, rarely used. He waited for Catherine, cooked dinner, and hoped for conversation, but their interactions were limited to short sentences, as if they were co-workers rather than husband and wife. One evening, around 10 o'clock, Jake sat on the couch with a bottle of beer, flipping through the channels on the television. The living room looked cozy but neglected. Catherine's throw was neatly folded, dust had collected on the coffee table, and the wedding photos on the shelf seemed like memories from another life. He heard the key turn in the lock and Catherine walked in, shaking rain off her jacket. Her jeans were wrinkled, and there were shadows under her eyes, but there was energy in her movements, as if work energized her. Hey, you're home. Jake turned off the TV and stood up, forcing a smile. How are you? Did you have time to eat? Catherine dropped her bag on a chair in the hallway and nodded without looking up. Yeah, I grabbed a sandwich from the office. It's been a hell of a day. We've got a big story to cover, a deadline to meet. Cool, he said, walking up to her as she took off her sneakers, leaving wet footprints on the floor. What's the article about? Are you digging into some developer again? Something like that, she said, walking into the kitchen and opening the fridge. I don't want to bore you with the details. My head is already splitting. Is there anything edible? Jake leaned against the door frame, watching her take out the yogurt. I made some lasagna. It's still in the oven. Should I reheat it? Nah, I'm not really hungry. Catherine picked up a spoon and sat down at the kitchen table, opening a jar. Just tired. Maybe I'll go to bed early. He swallowed his disappointment. He'd spent 3 hours making lasagna, thinking they'd have dinner together. Okay, if you change your mind, let me know. Catherine ate while scrolling through her phone, her fingers flying quickly across the screen. Jake walked back into the living room but didn't turn on the TV. He looked at her bag, casually tossed by the door, and wondered when they'd last talked about anything other than work or bills. She'd withdrawn since her diagnosis a year ago, and he'd given her the space she'd asked for. But now that space was a chasm he didn't know how to bridge. Half an hour later, Catherine came upstairs, leaving the empty jar on the table. Jake put it away, washed the spoon, and went back to his laptop, but the plans were not going well. He felt invisible in his own home. He remembered how they had dreamed of a child, how Catherine had drawn plans for the nursery. Now that room stood empty, filled with boxes of her old things. The next day, Catherine left for the office early while Jake was still drinking coffee at the kitchen table. He heard the door slam and was left holding a mug with "Best Husband" engraved on it. He wanted to follow her, to tell her he missed her, but instead he opened his laptop and buried his nose in work. She returned by 11 o'clock, the smell of coffee and paper clinging to her clothes. Jake was in the kitchen, heating up leftover lasagna. Hey, you're just in time, he smiled, setting the plate on the table. Sit down and eat properly. Sandwiches aren't food. Catherine sighed, hanging her jacket over the back of a chair. Jake, I'm really tired. Maybe I should just make some tea and go to bed. Cat, you haven't eaten all day. He put down the second plate, trying to speak calmly. 5 minutes. Let's sit and chat. I haven't seen you in ages. She looked at him, her face softening. Okay, 5 minutes. She sat down, picking up her fork. But don't expect me to give you a long speech. My brain's switched off. Got it, he said, sitting down across from her, pouring her water from a pitcher. So what about your article? You said it was big. Is it like that story with City Hall? Way cooler, Catherine said, taking a bite of lasagna, her eyes lighting up. We found documents that link a developer to bribing government officials. If we publish this, it's going to blow up. My editor is already making arrangements to sell the story to major newspapers. Damn, that's powerful, Jake whistled, genuinely impressed. You're a star. You're going to be writing a column for the Washington Post soon. Don't be ridiculous, she snorted, but smiled. It's a team effort. But yeah, if it works out, it'll be my breakthrough. You deserve it, he looked at her, feeling pride mixed with emptiness. You always wanted to do something important. Here you are already doing it. Catherine shrugged, but her cheeks were slightly pink. We'll see. Right now, it's just a lot of stress and lack of sleep. They ate in silence, and for a second Jake thought she was back, his Catherine, sharing dreams and jokes. But then she pushed her plate away, standing up. Thanks for dinner. I'm going to shower and go to bed. I'm going to be slammed again tomorrow. Cat, wait, he stood up, taking a step toward her. Can we sit for a while? Watch a movie, relax. We haven't hung out together in, I don't know how long. She paused, looking at him. Jake, I'm exhausted. I have a deadline in 2 days, and I can't just switch off. How about this weekend? You said the same thing last time, he said, not wanting to sound harsh, but the words slipped out. Cat, I know the job is important, but I hardly see you. We live like strangers. Her face tightened, and she crossed her arms. What do you want me to do? Give up everything? This article is my chance, Jake. I can't just sit at home and watch TV. I'm not asking you to quit, He raised his voice, then lowered it. I just want us to be together. For a little while, you said we were a team. Catherine pressed her lips together, her eyes glittering. We are a team, but right now, I need to focus. You're on my side, right? Of course, for you. He ran his hand through his hair, feeling the words getting stuck. But I miss you, Cat. Us. She was silent, looking at the floor. I miss you too, she finally said, but her voice was quiet, almost guilty. Just, give me a couple of weeks. This article will make it easier. Okay, he nodded, although he didn't believe it would get any easier. Go and rest. Catherine went upstairs, and Jake heard the shower start. He stayed in the kitchen, looking at the empty plates. The house was theirs, but he felt like a guest. He remembered how they had discussed doctors, adoption options a year ago. She had been far away then, too, but he had thought it was temporary. Now he wasn't sure. Catherine stood under the hot water, her eyes closed. Work was her anchor. Every article, every line, drowned out thoughts of the diagnosis, of the room upstairs that remained empty. She knew Jake was trying, but his concern reminded her of what she had lost. She wanted to go back to him, to their old life, but she couldn't find her way back. One evening, Jake was in their kitchen making dinner. Spaghetti with pesto, a salad, a bottle of red wine on the table. He had put on a clean shirt, hoping that Catherine would be home early so they could spend the evening together. The living room was tidy. The throw on the couch was neatly folded, the coffee table dusted, and on the shelf were their wedding photos, which he sometimes looked at, remembering better days. The TV was off, and music was playing softly on the speakers, some indie rock that Catherine liked. The door slammed around 8, and Catherine walked in, humming. She was wearing a new maroon sweater, jeans, and shiny black boots. Her hair, usually pulled back into a ponytail, was loose, and her lipstick was shiny. She looked alive, almost like the girl Jake had met at the bar 6 years ago. Wow, that smells delicious. Catherine threw her bag on a chair in the entryway and walked into the kitchen, smiling. You're setting up a restaurant. What's the occasion? Jake turned away from the stove, drying his hands on a towel. I just wanted to. You like pesto. Sit down, it'll be ready in a minute. You're adorable. She kissed him on the cheek as she walked toward the table. But I won't be long. I have a couple more work calls to finish up. His smile faltered, but he nodded. Okay, the calls can wait. Let's eat like normal people. Catherine laughed as she sat down at the table. Normal people, you say? Us? With my deadlines and your blueprints? Hey, I'm the master of normalcy, Jake said, setting down plates of spaghetti and pouring wine. Look, dinner, music, wine, just like old times. You're cute, she said, taking a sip from her glass. But the old days were without my editors calling at 9 o'clock. He sat down opposite her, trying not to show his disappointment. Well, at least tell me what you have going on there. You've been so charged up lately. A new project. Yeah, something like that. Catherine twirled spaghetti around her fork, her eyes glittering. We're working on a series about environmental abuses. There's a factory dumping waste into a river, and we almost caught them red-handed. If it all comes together, it'll be my best story yet. Damn, Cat, that's awesome. Jake smiled, genuinely proud. You're saving the world. I always knew you were a star. Don't exaggerate, she snorted, but her smile widened. Just doing my job. But yeah, it's exciting. What about you? Still drawing your eco-houses? I'm trying, he shrugged, taking a bite of salad. My boss wants me to add more commercial flair, but I'm sticking to my panels and recycling. Maybe I'll build us a house like that someday. Catherine nodded, but her gaze slid to the phone lying next to her. Cool. You've always been pro-nature. Jake saw her glance at the screen and felt a pang. Hey, the phone isn't going to run away. Let's eat without it, okay? I want your attention for at least half an hour. Oh, sorry, she put the phone down, smiling apologetically. Force of habit. Editors write every 5 minutes. I understand, he took a sip of wine, trying not to press. But you've been so alive lately. You joke, you smile, you even bought new clothes. I'm glad, Kat. I really am. She looked at him, her smile softening. Thank you. I don't know, I felt better. Work helps. And you do, too, of course. That's good. He took her hand across the table, squeezing it. I missed your smile. Catherine squeezed his hand back, but quickly let go, returning to her food. You're too sentimental. Eat before it gets cold. They ate, chatting about small things, about Jake's colleague who spilled coffee on the blueprints, about the time Catherine almost got stuck in the elevator at the newsroom. She laughed, joked, and Jake found himself looking at her like a lovesick teenager. But when dinner was over, she stood up, picking up her phone. Okay, I need to make a few calls. I'll be back later. We'll see if it's not too late. Kat, seriously, he stood up, clearing away the plates. You just got here? Maybe you could put off work for an hour? We haven't hung out in ages. She sighed, adjusting her sweater. Jake, this is important. If I don't answer, the editor will kill me. Half an hour and I'm yours. You always say that. He didn't mean to sound accusatory, but the words came out. Half an hour turns into half a night. I just want us to be together. Catherine crossed her arms, her smile vanishing. I'm trying, Jake. Work is at its peak right now. You can see how important this is to me. I see, he put the plates in the sink, feeling his hopes fading. But I hardly see you. You come, you eat dinner, and you're gone. We haven't been close in a long time, Kat. Her face tightened, and she looked away. Don't start. I'm just busy. It doesn't mean I don't love you. I know you do, he stepped toward her, lowering his voice. But I think your joy isn't because of us. It's not because of me. Catherine looked at him, her eyes narrowing. What do you mean? I'm happy because work is going well. You want me to sit around and be sad again? No, hell no, he ran a hand through his hair. I'm glad you're happy. It's just, I'm not a part of it. You stay out late, come home all radiant, but not with me. You're being paranoid, she shook her head, but her voice was sharper. I'm working, Jake. This isn't about you. Give me space, okay? Space? He almost laughed, but it was bitter. Kat, you have so much space that I'm losing you. She was silent, clutching her phone. I need to make some calls, she finally said and went into the office, closing the door. Jake stayed in the kitchen, looking at the half-emptied glasses. He wanted to believe she was right, that it was just work. But her new sweater, her laughter, her detachment, none of it was for him. He felt it like a chill in his chest. He remembered her sitting in this same kitchen a year ago, crying after a doctor's appointment. He had thought it couldn't get any worse. Now he wasn't so sure. Catherine sat in her office, looking at the phone but not dialing. She knew Jake was right. She was drifting away. Jake sat in his office at an architectural firm downtown, staring at his laptop screen, where the plans for a new apartment complex had long since ceased to interest him. His thoughts were on Catherine. Jake noticed how she checked her phone when she thought he wasn't looking, and how her smile, so bright lately, faded when they were alone. On Friday night, he returned home earlier than usual, expecting to find Catherine. Their house on Maple Street looked the same as always. Blue shutters, neat lawn, lights on in the living room. But the interior was empty. Catherine had left a note on the kitchen table. Working late, don't wait up. Food in the fridge. Jake crumpled the paper and threw it in the trash. It was the third note that week. He opened the fridge, got a beer, and sat down at the table, feeling his irritation growing. She had promised to be home by 7, and it was already 9. At 9:30, the door slammed and Catherine came in, shaking the rain off her umbrella. She was wearing a new gray raincoat and the same black boots she had recently bought. Her hair was slightly disheveled and her cheeks were pink, as if she had been in a hurry. Hey, you're not asleep yet, Catherine smiled. hanging her coat on a hook in the hallway. I thought you'd be in bed. Jake turned around, holding a bottle of beer. Waiting for you. You said you'd be here by 7. She froze, her smile faltering. Oh, sorry. I was sitting with my colleagues, discussing new material. Time flew by. The colleagues again, he put the bottle on the table, his voice even but tense. You're with them every night. What kind of material can't wait until the morning? Catherine walked into the kitchen, opening the refrigerator. Jake, don't start. This is work. We're doing a series of articles, I told you. Do you want me to give up the chance? I don't want you to say no, he stood up, taking a step toward her. I want you to be honest. You come in late, wearing a new coat, grinning from ear to ear, and you say it's work. But I'm not stupid, Kat. She closed the fridge, turning to him. Her eyes narrowed. What are you trying to say? That I'm lying? This is ridiculous. You're lying. The word slipped out, and he immediately regretted it, but it was too late to back out. Last Tuesday, you said you had a meeting until 8. I called the office at 9, and they said you left at 6. Where were you? Catherine pressed her lips together, crossing her arms over her chest. You were checking me out? Seriously, Jake? We were having coffee with the team at the cafe across the street. Is that a crime now? Coffee until 9. He raised his voice, feeling the anger boiling. You don't even answer my texts. I'm sitting here like an idiot, and you're hanging out somewhere, and you can't tell me where. You're insufferable, she pointed a finger at him, her voice shaking. I'm working, Jake. I'm building a career, and you're making a scene because I'm not sitting at home holding your hand. Work? He stepped closer, his face flushed. You're not at work, Kat. You're with someone. I see the way you check your phone, the way you smile when you think I'm not looking. What's going on? Nothing is happening, she shouted, her eyes flashing. You're making this up because you're bored. If you can't handle the fact that I have a life, that's your problem. My problem? He slammed his palm down on the table, the beer bottle clinking. We're married, Kat, and you act like I'm a stranger. I deserve the truth. Catherine grabbed her bag and headed for the door. I'm not listening to this. You want to fight? Congratulations, you got it. I'm leaving. Where? To my colleagues? He followed her, but she slammed the door, the sound echoing through the house. Jake remained in the hallway, breathing heavily. He heard her car start and the headlights flash in the window before she drove away. He sank down on the couch, clutching his head in his hands. The living room was quiet, the TV off, the blanket still in place, but the house felt empty. He remembered her laughing at dinner a month ago, wearing a new sweater, her eyes avoiding his. Her explanations, meetings, coffee, work sounded like memorized phrases. He didn't want to believe she was lying, but the truth was beating in his chest. Something was wrong. The next day, Jake sat in his office, a small room overlooking downtown Portland. His desk was covered in blueprints and coffee cups, and his laptop displayed a half-finished project. He couldn't concentrate. The argument from the night before was swirling in his head, and every word Catherine had said sounded like a lie. He opened his browser, typed, Private Investigator Portland, and stared at the screen. It was crazy, but the thought that he might be wrong or worse, right, was nagging at him. After lunch, he called the number in the ad. The man on the other end, who introduced himself as Rick Carter, sounded calm and businesslike. Carter, Private Investigations. How can I help you? Jake swallowed, his fingers tightening on his phone. I need to know what my wife is doing. She says she's at work, but I'm not sure. Is that possible? Maybe, Rick's voice was even. Spy, gather information, photos if necessary. Tell me more, and I'll tell you what I can do. I don't know where to start. Jake rubbed his forehead. She stays out late, says she's with coworkers. But I think maybe she's with someone. I want to know the truth. Got it. Rick didn't judge, didn't sound surprised. I need her details. Name, photo, job, habits. Where she goes when she's not home. I'll start with observation. usually a week or two, depending on her schedule. Cost, 500 in advance, then based on results. Jake hesitated, feeling like a traitor. But then he remembered Catherine slamming the door, and he nodded, even though Rick couldn't see him. Okay, I'll send it today. How long will it take to find out? If she's active, a couple of days, Rick said, as if he were talking about the weather. I'll let you know as soon as there's anything concrete. We'll meet tomorrow to discuss the details. Deal, Jake said, giving the address of a nearby cafe and hanging up. His hands were shaking. He felt dirty, but he couldn't stop. He had to know. The next day, Jake sat in the corner of Bean and Brew, a small place with wooden tables and the smell of freshly brewed coffee. His jeans were wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes from a sleepless night. Catherine had gotten home around midnight the night before, said sorry, and gone to bed without looking at him. He didn't know whether to believe her. Rick walked in at exactly 2, a man in his 40s, in a gray jacket and jeans, with a short beard and tired eyes. He looked like an ordinary guy, not like a detective from the movies. Jake, he extended his hand, sitting down opposite. Yeah, Jake shook his hand, feeling awkward. Thanks for coming. No problem, Rick said, taking out a notepad and pen. I got your letter. Photo, office address, Catherine's schedule. Tell me more. Where might she be, other than work? Are there any friends she sees often? Jake swallowed, looking at his coffee. She works at the Portland Tribune. She says she's staying up late with some co-workers. There's a coffee shop across the street called Grounds, she mentioned him. Friends, Lisa, her friend, but they rarely see each other. I don't know who else she's with. Okay, Rick wrote down, not looking up. I'll start with the office and the cafe. See where she goes, who she goes with. If she's dating anyone, I'll see it. Do you want photos, videos? Yeah, Jake nodded, his voice quiet. I want to know for sure. Got it, Rick closed his notebook. I'll start today. I'll let you know in a couple of days. If you change your mind, call me and I'll refund the advance. I'm not changing my mind, Jake looked at him, clutching his mug. I want the truth. Rick nodded as if he'd heard it 1,000 times. By then, he stood up, leaving his business card behind, and walked away. Jake stayed in the cafe, looking out at the street where the rain pounded the sidewalk. He felt like he was on the edge of a precipice. If Catherine was just working, he would feel like an idiot. But if she was lying, he didn't want to think about it, but he couldn't stop thinking. He went home, but the house was empty. Catherine had texted, "I'll be late, don't wait up." He went to bed alone, clutching his phone, waiting for Rick to call. Jake sat in his Ford, parked outside a nondescript office building downtown. His fingers gripped the steering wheel, even though the engine had long since died. He was waiting for a call from Rick Carter, the private investigator he had assigned to follow Catherine a week ago. He checked his phone every morning, hoping and dreading news. Today Rick had texted, "Got leads. Be at the office at 2. Jake felt his stomach clench. He didn't know if he wanted to know the truth, but he had no choice. Rick's office was on the 3rd floor, in a building with peeling paint and a creaky elevator. Jake walked in, shaking rain off his jacket. His jeans were slightly damp, and there were shadows under his eyes from sleepless nights. The room was cramped, a metal desk covered in folders, an old computer, a coffee maker in the corner that smelled like burnt coffee. Rick, wearing the same gray jacket he'd worn when they first met, sat at the desk, leafing through a notebook. His beard looked a little longer, his eyes just as tired. "Jake, sit down," Rick nodded at the chair across from him, closing his notebook. "Want some coffee? It's just lousy." "No, thanks," Jake sat up, his voice hoarse. He clasped his hands to hide his trembling. "What do you have? Found something?" Rick looked at him, his face neutral, like a doctor about to receive bad news. "Yes, I found it. I followed her for 5 days, like we agreed. There are photos, videos. But first, tell me, are you sure you want to see this? Sometimes it's better not to know." Jake swallowed, his throat feeling dry. I hired you to know. Show me. Okay, Rick pulled an envelope and a flash drive out of his desk drawer, placing them in front of Jake. It's all here. Photos in the envelope, videos on the flash drive. I made copies just in case. Jake stared at the envelope, hesitant to take it. Tell me first, what's in it? Rick leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. I started at her office, the Portland Tribune. She leaves around 6, sometimes later. 3 times out of 5, she didn't go home. The first night, she was at a restaurant, Vino, in the Northwest, with a man about 40 in a suit. They drank wine, laughed, and held hands a couple of times. Then they left together, got into his car. I followed him to his apartment in the Pearl District. She came out 2 hours later. Jake felt the blood drain from his face. Who is he? Mark Davis, senior editor at her paper. Rick opened his notebook, reading from it. He lives alone, divorced, and has no kids. I checked his social media, and he and Catherine like each other's posts. Nothing obvious, but they're not just colleagues. What else? Jake said quietly, but his voice was shaking. They were at Grounds Cafe across the street from the office on Tuesday, Rick continued. They were sitting close, she was laughing, he was touching her hand. I shot a video yesterday outside his apartment. They arrived together, hugging, kissing at the entrance. She left an hour later. It's all on a flash drive. Jake closed his eyes, his fingers digging into the arms of his chair. He could imagine it, but hearing it was worse. Are you sure it's her? I'm sure, Rick said, pulling the envelope closer. Look at the photo if you want, but I'm not wrong. Did Jake really deserve such betrayal, or is the truth not always so simple? Like if you believe that lies always come out, and subscribe so you don't miss the next exciting stories. Jake nodded, his hand slowly moving toward the envelope. He opened it, pulling out a stack of photographs. The first, Catherine in a restaurant, wearing a maroon sweater, smiling at the man across from him. Her hand was in his. The second, they were getting out of the car, his arm around her waist. The third, at the entrance, she was kissing him, her fingers in his hair. Jake watched, and each picture was a blow. He recognized her coat, her boots, her smile, the one that had been there for him. The video is worse, Rick said calmly. I can turn it on, but it's the same thing, only with movement. No need. Jake put the photo on the table, his voice empty. I get it. Rick nodded, putting the flash drive away in the drawer. What next? Do you want me to keep monitoring? Or should I pass the materials on to someone? A lawyer, for example. Jake shook his head. No, that's it. How much do I owe? 1,000 minus the deposit. Rick pulled out the bill. Call me if you change your mind. Jake pulled out his wallet, counted out $500 in cash, and placed it on the table. Thank you, he said, taking the envelope and the flash drive. He stood up, feeling his legs buckle, and walked out without looking back. He sat in the car for a few minutes, looking at the envelope on the passenger seat. Rain pounded the roof, and memories swirled in his head. Catherine at their wedding, laughing by the fire, crying after a doctor's appointment. He had loved her, he still did, despite everything. But she had chosen someone else. He started the engine and drove home, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. Their house on Maple Street was dark. Catherine had not yet returned. Jake walked in, throwing his jacket on the couch. The living room was the same, a blanket, photographs, a stack of magazines on the table. But now everything seemed foreign. He sat at the kitchen table, opened his laptop, and inserted the flash drive. The screen lit up, showing a folder with one file, Catherine_1810. He clicked, and the video started playing. On the screen, Catherine and the man Mark, Rick said, were getting out of a car at a high rise. She was laughing, fixing her hair. He put his arms around her, pulling her close, and they kissed, long like lovers. Her arms went around his neck. His fingers slid down her back. Jake watched, feeling the pain in his chest. He stopped the video before the end and slammed his laptop shut. He sat in silence, looking at the empty bottle of beer he had left that morning. He remembered how Catherine had promised to be home, how she had said, "It's just work." Every word she had said had been a lie. He thought about how he had tried to support her after her diagnosis, how he had suggested adoption to the doctors. He had given her everything he could, and she had left not for him, but for someone else. Jake took out his phone and dialed his friend Tom, who knew a lawyer. "Tom, hi." His voice was hoarse. "I need a lawyer. For a divorce." "Damn, Jake, are you serious?" Tom sounded surprised. "What happened? You and Catherine." "I don't want to talk," Jake interrupted. "Just give me the contact information, please." "Okay, I'll send it to you now." Tom paused. "If anything happens, call me, brother. I'm nearby." "Thanks," Jake said as he hung up. A minute later, a text came through with the number of a lawyer, one Sarah Miller. He wrote it down but didn't call. It wasn't time yet. He went up to the bedroom, but he didn't lie down. Instead, he sat on the bed, looking at the picture of them on the nightstand, them at the beach, hugging, laughing. He picked up the frame, wanted to smash it, but stopped himself. Instead, he laid it face down. He didn't want to fight, didn't want to yell. Catherine had made her choice, and he wasn't going to beg her to come back. Divorce was the only way out. Catherine returned after midnight. Jake heard her come in quietly, hang up her coat, and go upstairs. She lay down next to him without touching him, and soon fell asleep. He lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling her warmth, but feeling nothing but emptiness. He knew he would begin the process in the morning. No words, no scenes. She didn't deserve his anger, only his silence. Sarah's office was in a low brick building with a sign reading Miller and Associates above the door. Jake walked in, shaking rain from his hair. The reception area smelled of coffee and paper, and there were 2-year-old magazines on the counter. Sarah, a woman in her 40s with short dark hair and a formal gray suit, greeted him in her office. The room was small, a wooden desk covered with folders, a couple of chairs, and a window overlooking the wet street. "Jake, sit down," Sarah pointed to a chair, adjusting her glasses. "Catherine is already here. She's in the next room. Are you ready to talk together, or do you want me to explain everything to her separately first?" Jake sat up, clasping his hands. "Together, let's get this over with." "Okay," Sarah nodded, pressing a button on her phone. "Linda, get Mrs. Wilson in." A minute later, the door opened and Catherine walked in. She was 30 and looked tired, with shadows under her eyes and her hair pulled back into a messy bun. She wore a familiar gray trench coat and black jeans. She glanced at Jake, but quickly looked away, sitting down in the chair opposite. Her bag slid to the floor, but she didn't pick it up. "Thank you for coming." Sarah opened the folder, her voice businesslike. "We're here to discuss your divorce agreement." Jake filed for a mutual consent divorce. "That means no court action if you both agree. I've prepared the paperwork, and the property division is standard. Catherine keeps the house, Jake gets the car and his personal belongings. No alimony since you don't have children and you both work. Any questions?" Catherine was silent, looking at her hands. Jake looked at the table, feeling the silence weighing on him. Finally, she looked up. "Why?" Her voice was quiet but firm. She looked at Jake. "Why are you doing this?" He met her gaze, his jaw tensing. "You know?" Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't look away. "I want to hear. Tell me, Jake. What did I do?" He clenched his fists under the table, but his voice remained level. "Don't play with me, Cat. You know what I mean. Let's just sign and be done with it." Catherine opened her mouth as if to argue, but then fell silent. Her fingers tightened on the strap of her bag. "You don't even want to talk? Just throw everything away?" "You threw this away," he said quietly, but each word was heavy. "I don't want to quarrel. Sign it, that's all." Sarah cleared her throat, breaking the tension. "Catherine, if you have any objections, we can discuss them. But Jake has made it clear that he wants to complete the process without conflict. If you agree, sign here and here." She moved the papers, pointing to the lines. Catherine looked at the papers, then back at Jake. Her eyes were shining, but there were no tears. "Do you really want this?" "Yes," he said, not looking away. "This is the end, Cat." She swallowed, picked up the pen, and signed, her hand shaking slightly. "There. Done." She pushed the papers aside and stood, picking up her bag. "Good luck, Jake." He nodded without answering. Catherine left, closing the door quietly. Jake stared at the empty chair, feeling something inside him break. Sarah gathered up the papers, her voice softening. "I'll send the papers to the court. You'll get confirmation in a couple of weeks. If you have any questions, call." "Thank you," Jake said, standing up, his movements mechanical. He walked outside into the rain and got into his car. The engine started on the first try, but he didn't know where to go. The house on Maple Street wasn't his anymore. He'd rented an apartment on the east side of town, and he was moving there today. The new apartment was in a 4-story building on Hawthorne Street, in an area where coffee shops and bars hummed even in the rain. The place was small, 1 bedroom, a living room with a kitchenette, an old couch left by the previous tenant, and boxes of Jake's things that he hadn't yet unpacked. The walls were white, it smelled of fresh paint, and the window looked out onto the wet street and neon signs. He threw his jacket on a chair, set a box of dishes on the kitchen counter, and opened a beer from the fridge. The cold bottle in his hand was the only thing he felt familiar with. Jake sat on the couch, looking at the boxes. There were his clothes, his books, a couple of picture frames he hadn't dared leave with Catherine. He thought moving would be a relief, but instead he felt empty. He remembered their wedding, Catherine in her white dress, her laughter, her promise to be there for him. He had believed then that they would be forever. Now she was kissing someone else, and he was signing papers to erase their past. He pulled out his phone, about to call Tom, but decided against it. Instead, he opened his laptop and tried to work. His firm needed blueprints by Monday, but the lines on the screen were blurry. He closed the laptop and turned on the TV, where an old sitcom was playing. The laughter coming from the speakers sounded fake, but he left it on to drown out the silence. The next day, Jake drove to the office, hoping for a distraction. His desk was piled high with papers, and his colleagues were chatting about the project, oblivious to his silence. He drew plans, but his thoughts kept returning to Catherine. He saw her face in the lawyer's office, her question, why? She knew what he was talking about, but she wanted him to say it out loud. He didn't give her the chance. Not because he was afraid, but because he didn't see the point. She had betrayed him, and that was enough. That evening, he went to a bar on Hawthorne called the Rusty Nail, with wooden tables and the smell of beer. He ordered a whiskey, hoping to drown out his thoughts. The bartender, a guy with tattoos on his arms, was chatting with the customers, but Jake sat silently, staring at his glass. He wondered what life would be like for Catherine. Would she stay in their house? Would she continue to date that editor? He hated himself for thinking about it, but he couldn't stop it. Rough day? The bartender nodded at his empty glass, wiping down the counter. Hard life, Jake chuckled, but there was no humor in it. One more, please. Got it. The bartender poured the whiskey without asking questions. Jake drank, feeling the alcohol burn in his throat. He wanted to start over, but he didn't know how. The apartment was empty, his job was routine, his friends were distant. He remembered how Catherine had laughed when they first met, how they'd made plans around the fire. Now Hethat was the past, and the future seemed as gray as Portland rain. When he got home, he lay down on the couch, still fully dressed. His phone was next to him, but no one was calling. He closed his eyes, hoping sleep would drown out the pain. Tomorrow he would start unpacking boxes, going to work, moving on with his life. But today he allowed himself to feel the emptiness. It was all he had left. Jake, 34, had lived in his Hawthorne Street apartment for 2 years, but it still didn't feel like home. Boxes of clothes sat in the corner of the living room, and empty beer bottles and bills littered the kitchen table. His job at an architecture firm was going well. He designed houses, received praise from his boss, but he felt like an outsider in the office. The coworkers who used to invite him for beers now whispered behind his back, and the friends he once hung out with responded briefly to texts or not at all. 6 months after his divorce from Catherine, Jake felt like his life was falling apart, and he didn't understand why. On Friday night, he stood in the corner of a crowded house on the city's east side, where Tom, an old friend of his, was having a birthday party. The living room was packed with people, some dancing to loud pop from the speakers, others chatting over plastic cups of beer. The smell of potato chips and perfume mingled with the warm air coming through the open windows. Jake, in jeans and a navy shirt, held a bottle of beer but barely drank. He'd come for a break, but he felt out of place. Tom clapped him on the shoulder, shouting, "Relax, bro," but quickly moved on to join the other guests. Jake scanned the crowd, noticing familiar faces. There were some college kids, a couple of Tom's coworkers, but no one was coming up to him to chat. He noticed the two guys at the kitchen island glance at him and then turn away, whispering something. His fingers tightened around the bottle. It wasn't the first time. At work, his coworker, Mike, had stopped inviting him to lunch, and Melissa, Catherine's cousin, hadn't returned his New Year's wishes. He felt like a ghost, and it was infuriating. Jake Wilson himself, a voice behind him made him turn. Lisa, Catherine's friend, was standing 2 feet away, holding a glass of wine. She was about 30, with long blonde hair, a black dress, and a wicked glint in her eyes. Jake had seen her a few times at parties when he and Catherine were married, but they had never gotten along. "Lisa," he nodded, trying to be polite. "I didn't know you were here." "I knew you would," she said, taking a sip of wine without looking away. "Tom invites everyone, even people like you." His eyebrows rose. "Like me? What does that mean?" She snorted, stepping closer. Her voice was loud, cutting through the music. "Don't play dumb, Jake. Everyone knows what you did. You think you can just hang out like nothing happened?" Jake felt the blood rush to his face. Several people turned and conversations died down. "What are you talking about, Lisa? Speak up." "Oh, I'll tell you." She pointed a finger at him, wine sloshing from her glass. "You cheated on Catherine. When she was depressed, when she was at her worst, you went after other people. You broke her heart, and now you're standing here like nothing happened. You're a scumbag." Jake froze, his jaw clenched. The guests around him were silent. Someone cleared their throats. He saw Tom making his way through the crowd, but he didn't have time to intervene. "You're wrong," Jake said quietly but firmly. "I didn't cheat. This is crazy." "Bullshit," Lisa laughed, but it was an evil laugh. "Catherine told me everything. How you abandoned her when she needed you. How you were hanging out with some broad while she was trying to cope. Don't lie, Jake. Everyone knows." He felt the floor shift beneath his feet. "Catherine said that I cheated?" His voice wavered, but he took a step toward Lisa. "That's a lie. She's lying." "You're pathetic." Lisa shook her head, her lips curling. "She was broken, and you just walked away. Don't you dare blame her for covering your ass." Jake squeezed the bottle so hard the glass creaked. He wanted to shout, to tell her about the photos, about the video of Catherine kissing her editor. But the words stuck. He saw the faces of the guests, the curiosity, the condemnation, and he knew they believed Lisa. They believed Catherine. "Lisa, that's enough." Tom finally pushed his way between them. "This is a party, not a showdown. Cool down." "I'm telling the truth," Lisa finished her wine, throwing the glass on the table. "He doesn't deserve to be here." She walked away into the crowd, leaving Jake under the gaze of the guests. "Jake, are you okay?" Tom put his hand on his shoulder, but Jake shook it off. "I have to go." He put the bottle on the table and headed for the door without looking back. It was drizzling outside, but he didn't notice. He got into his car, his hands shaking as he put the key in the ignition. Catherine had lied. Not just to him, but to everyone. She had rewritten their history, making him the villain. Back at the Hawthorne apartment, Jake dropped his jacket on the floor and opened a beer from the fridge. The living room was dark, An old couch, boxes in the corner, a TV he rarely turned on. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty bottle. He remembered how he and Catherine had hung out with Tom and Melissa, laughing at stupid jokes. They had been friends then. Now Tom looked at him with pity, and Melissa didn't respond. He realized that Catherine had told her side of the story to everyone, her friends, her family, maybe even his coworkers. He pulled out his phone and chatted with Melissa. "Hey, did you hear about me and Catherine? About cheating?" He sent a message, but there was no response. He knew there wouldn't be one. He scrolled through his contacts, friends he hadn't spoken to in months, coworkers who had stopped inviting him out for beers. They had all heard Catherine's story. She was the victim, and he was the scum. Jake stood up and paced the apartment, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He remembered signing the papers at the lawyer's, Catherine asking why he'd thought she felt guilty. Now he saw that she was already building her lie. He wanted to call her, to scream at her for ruining his life, but instead he clutched the phone, feeling anger mingle with helplessness. The next day at the office was worse. His coworker Mike walked past, muttering hi, but not stopping. The girl from accounting who had joked with him earlier looked away as he walked into the kitchen. Jake sat at his desk, looking at the blueprints, but all he saw was Lisa's face, her words, "You cheated." He opened his email, wrote a letter to his boss, asking for a few days off. "Personal business," he wrote, without going into detail. That evening, he walked into the Rusty Nail on Hawthorne, the same bar where he'd been drinking since his divorce. The smell of beer and fried food was familiar, but not comforting. He ordered a whiskey while sitting at the bar. The bartender, the same guy with the tattoos, nodded at him. "Tough day again?" "Tough year," Jake chuckled, swirling his glass. "You know how it is when everyone thinks you're crap and you can't prove anything?" "It happens," the bartender shrugged, wiping down the counter. "People love gossip. Never mind." "Easy to say," Jake said, drinking the whiskey, feeling it burn in his throat. He wanted to ignore it, but he couldn't. Catherine had stolen not only their marriage, but his friends, his reputation. He felt trapped, and there was no way out. Jake sat in his apartment, at a kitchen table littered with empty beer bottles and old bills. His laptop was open, but the screen had long since gone dark. In front of him lay the same envelope, tattered, dog-eared, that private investigator Rick Carter had given him 2 years ago. Inside were the photos and a flash drive with a video that proved Catherine had cheated on him. Jake had hidden them in a drawer, deciding not to take revenge, but to simply leave. Now, after the party where Lisa had accused him of cheating and his friends had turned their backs, he pulled the envelope out again. The rage that had been building for months was pushing him to take action. The apartment was dark. An old couch with a sagging seat, boxes he'd never unpacked in the corner, bare walls devoid of photographs. The only sounds were the rain on the window and the hum of the refrigerator. Jake opened the envelope, spilling the photos onto the table. Catherine at the restaurant, laughing, holding the hand of Mark Davis, the senior editor of her newspaper. Catherine outside his apartment, kissing him, her fingers in his hair. Each photo was like a knife, but now the pain was mingled with anger. She hadn't just betrayed him, she had rewritten their history, making him a monster in the eyes of his friends, his coworkers, and everyone who knew them. He picked up the flash drive and twirled it in his fingers. He had watched the video only once, 2 years ago, but he remembered every frame. Her smile, his hand on her waist, their kiss at the entrance. He had wanted to forget them. Now he wanted everyone to know the truth. He inserted the flash drive into his laptop, and the screen lit up, showing a folder with a file called Catherine_1810. He didn't open it, he didn't have the strength to watch it again. Instead, he opened his email and began making a list. Her boss at the Portland Tribune, her sister Emily, their mutual friends Tom, Melissa, even Lisa. He wanted them to see who Catherine really was. "You're really going to do this?" The voice in his head sounded like his own, but doubtful. He leaned back in his chair, looking at the photographs. It was mean. Sending evidence would ruin her mundane task, would ruin her career, her reputation, her life. He knew she deserved it, but the thought of revenge made him feel dirty. He remembered their wedding, Catherine in her white dress, her laughter, her vows. He had loved her then. Part of him still did, and that was what pissed him off the most. Jake stood up and paced the room, his boots squeaking on the wooden floor. He stopped at the window, looking out onto the street. The neon signs of bars and coffee shops flickered in the darkness. People hurried under umbrellas. He thought about how Catherine had gone on with her life. New clothes, a new job, sympathetic friends. And he was an outcast, a man shunned at parties, whispered about at the office. She had stolen his life, and he could not forgive her. He returned to his desk, opened a new document, and began writing. To editor at portlandtribune.com. Subject, The Truth About Catherine Wilson. His fingers paused over the keyboard. What would he say? Your employee cheated on me with Mark Davis. It sounded petty, pathetic. He erased the text, tried again. I have evidence of unprofessional behavior by your employee. It was better, but still not quite right. He wanted them to feel what he felt, betrayed, humiliated. The phone rang, startling him. It was Tom. Jake hesitated, but answered. Hey, Tom. His voice was hoarse. Jake, how are you? After that party, I wanted to check. Tom spoke carefully, as if he was afraid of saying something wrong. I'm fine, Jake lied, looking at the photos. Just trying to figure it out. Lisa was drunk, dude. Never mind. Tom tried to sound light, but his voice betrayed his awkwardness. She's just into Catherine, you know. Yeah, I know. Jake squeezed the phone. All for Catherine. Tom paused. Listen, if you want a beer, I'm free on Friday. Let's go to the Rusty Nail. Maybe, Jake didn't want to promise. I'll call. Okay, hang in there. Tom hung up. Jake threw the phone on the table, feeling his anger return. Even Tom, his best friend, looked at him with pity. He remembered going to the beach with Tom and Catherine, roasting marshmallows, laughing until they cried. Now Tom was calling to be polite, and Catherine was telling everyone he was a traitor. He went back to his laptop, opened the folder with the photos, and selected 3 of the clearest. Catherine and Mark in the restaurant, by the car, by the front door. He created an archive, attached it to the letter. Then he wrote, Dear colleagues, this is evidence of an affair between Catherine Wilson and Mark Davis. I believe this is unacceptable for the staff of your newspaper. He added copies for Emily, Catherine's sister, and Lisa. His fingers hovered over the send button. His heart was pounding. You'll be just like her, the voice in his head came back. He closed his laptop without sending. He couldn't do it like this, sitting in the dark like some kind of vigilante, but the thought wouldn't go away. He imagined Catherine's face when her boss opened the email, when Emily saw the photo. She deserved it, but he wasn't sure if he deserved to be the man to do it. Jake took a beer from the fridge, opened it, and took a sip. The cold taste was not comforting. He walked back to the table, opened the drawer, and pulled out an old letter from Catherine, written before the wedding. Jake, I love you more than I can say. You are my home. He crumpled the paper, tossed it in the trash. It was a lie, like everything else. He opened the laptop again, recovered the email. He added another sentence. She accused me of cheating on her to cover up her own guilt. It was true, and he wanted them to know. He checked the addresses. Editorial, Emily, Lisa, Melissa. He thought of Tom, but didn't add him. Tom shouldn't see this. Jake stood up and walked around the apartment, his footsteps echoing. He stopped at the mirror in the hallway, looking at his reflection. Unshaven face, dark circles under his eyes, his t-shirt wrinkled. He didn't recognize himself. Catherine hadn't just taken his friends, she'd taken him. He walked back to the table and sat down, staring at the screen. His finger hovered over the send button. You don't have to. The voice was quieter, almost pleading. But another voice, louder, was saying, She destroyed you. It's time to answer. He remembered Lisa, her words, You're a scumbag. He remembered the whispers of his colleagues, Melissa's silence. He remembered Catherine kissing Mark, laughing, while he waited for her at home. He closed his eyes, clenched his fists. He knew he would do it. Jake stood on the porch, his boots leaving muddy marks on the wooden planks. His navy blue jacket was soaked, and his fists were clenched with rage. It was after midnight, and he had just shouted at the door, "Catherine, open the damn door." She had, and their exchange of accusations and threats had been short-lived. Now he stood before her in the hallway, his voice shaking with anger. "You think you can get away with this?" Jake looked at Catherine, her pale face illuminated by the dim light of the lamp. She was wearing a gray robe, her hair in a messy bun, but her eyes were wary. "You lied to me, Cat. Everyone thinks I'm a jerk, but now you'll regret it." "Jake, calm down." Catherine raised her hands, her voice steady, but her fingers shaking. "You're out of your mind. Let's talk, but not like this. I'll pour you some coffee. We'll sit down." "Coffee?" He almost laughed, but it was bitter. "Are you serious? That's not why I came here. I have everything, Cat. Photos, videos, you and your editor. I'll send this to everyone, your boss, your coworkers, Emily, Lisa. We'll see how you look when the truth comes out." Her face went pale, and she grabbed his sleeve. "Jake, no. You won't do this. It will destroy me. My career, my life. Please." "You weren't thinking about me when you lied." He shook her hand off, stepping toward the door. "You started this game. Now it's my turn." "Jake, wait," she called, but he was already out, slamming the door. The cold air hit him in the face, the rain running down his cheeks. He climbed into his Ford, parked at the curb, and pulled out his phone. His fingers were shaking, but he opened his email, where the letter he had composed the day before was already written. An archive of photos and videos Catherine with Mark Davis at a restaurant outside his apartment, kissing, hugging, was attached. The addressees, the Portland Tribune, Emily, Catherine's sister, Lisa, Melissa, and several of her colleagues whose emails he had found online. The subject, the truth about Catherine Wilson. Last chance, he told himself, staring at the screen. He could delete the email, leave, forget about it. But then he remembered Lisa at the party, her words, "You're a scumbag." He remembered the whispers of his coworkers, the silence of his friends. Catherine had ruined his life, and he wasn't going to let that go unanswered. He hit send, and a notification popped up. Email sent. His heart was pounding, but he felt a strange sense of relief. It was done. He started the car and drove away, leaving Kat's, his ex-wife's, house behind. The rain was pouring down on the windshield and Portland was asleep, except for the occasional car on the road. Jake drove to his apartment on Hawthorne Street without turning on the radio. He knew what he had done, and he knew there was no turning back. It was a typical morning at the Portland Tribune. The editor-in-chief, Paul Campbell, sat in his corner office, thumbing through his email on his computer. His desk was piled high with papers, and a coffee mug with "Boss" written on it sat next to him. He opened an email from an unfamiliar address, frowning. The subject line, "The truth about Catherine Wilson," looked suspicious, but he clicked. He froze when he read the first lines. "Your staffer Catherine Wilson had an affair with Mark Davis, a senior editor, and lied about me cheating on her," and froze. The attached archive contained photos and videos. He clicked one, Catherine and Mark at a restaurant holding hands. Then a video, them kissing in a driveway, her arms around his neck. "Damn it," Paul muttered, leaning back in his chair. He called his second-in-command, Jenna Marshall, an energetic woman in a formal suit. "Jenna, come in. It's urgent." Jenna walked in holding a tablet. "What's wrong? Problems with the new release?" "Worse." Paul turned the monitor toward her. "Watch this." Jenna looked through the materials, her face pale. "This, Catherine and Mark, this is real?" "It looks like it." Paul rubbed his temples. "Someone sent it to the entire newsroom. I checked, and half the department got copies. And that's not all. They're accusing Catherine of slandering her ex-husband." "Oh my God," Jenna slumped down in her chair. "What are we going to do? This is a scandal. If this gets out on the internet." "I know," Paul stood, looking out the window. "We need to talk to Catherine and Mark. Now, call them into my office at 10. Jenna nodded, already dialing Catherine's number. Back in the office, the letter was spreading like wildfire. Reporters were whispering around the coffee machine, sending photos to each other. "Did you see it? Catherine and Mark?" one asked. "I thought she said her husband cheated on her," another replied. Shock mixed with curiosity, and by 9 o'clock the office was buzzing. In a neat house with a white picket fence outside Portland, Catherine's sister Emily opened the mail over her morning coffee. Her kitchen was bright, with children's drawings on the refrigerator and the smell of toast. She frowned at the letter from an unfamiliar address. She read the first few lines and gasped, spilling coffee on the table. The photo of Catherine with Mark, their kiss, it was a blow. Emily knew Catherine had been going through a rough time since her diagnosis, but she had told her that Jake had cheated on her, left her. Now it seems like a lie. "How could you?" Emily muttered as she opened the video, her anger growing with each frame. She grabbed her phone and dialed Catherine, who didn't answer. Emily left a voicemail. "Cat, what the hell? You lied about Jake? Call me right now." She texted Catherine's friend Lisa. "Did you see this? Catherine cheated on him with Mark. She lied about Jake." Lisa responded a minute later. "What? No, it's fake." She wouldn't. But Emily knew it wasn't fake. She felt betrayed not just by Jake, but by her sister. At the newsroom, Catherine walked into Paul's office at 10 in the morning, her face pale and her hands shaking. She'd received a call from Jenna an hour earlier, but she didn't know what it was about. Paul was sitting at his desk. Jenna was standing by the window, both of them staring at her, stony-faced. "Catherine, sit down." Paul pointed to a chair. "We have a problem." "What happened?" Her voice was weak. She sat up, clutching her bag. Paul opened his laptop, turning it toward her. On the screen was a photo of her and Mark at a restaurant. Catherine froze, her breath catching in her throat. Where is this from?" "Someone sent this to the entire newsroom," Paul said harshly. "And your family, your friends. There's a video too. You're with Mark outside his apartment. Is it true?" Catherine opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her eyes filled with tears. It was a long time ago. It's not." "That's enough." Paul raised his hand. "Do you realize how this looks? This is a family newspaper, Catherine. And you're sleeping with a senior editor and, judging from the letter, lying about your ex-husband. That's unacceptable." "I didn't lie." She shook her head, but her voice was shaking. "Jake, We'll figure it out," Jenna interjected, her tone cold. "But for now, you might want to take some time off. We'll run an investigation, and pray this doesn't get out in the press." Catherine nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. She stood up unsteadily and walked out, not looking at her colleagues who were whispering in the hallway. Her world was crumbling, and she knew who had done it. Jake sat in his apartment, staring at his phone. He hadn't slept all night, checking his email, but there were no replies. He knew they had arrived. He could see the delivery receipts. His anger had subsided, replaced by a strange emptiness. He had done it. Catherine now knew what it was like to lose everything. But there was no relief. He opened a beer, took a sip, but the taste was bitter. The rain pounded the window, and Portland went about its business, oblivious to his war. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.